Hello everyone, Dr. Polaris here. For as long as I can remember, paleontology has always been a major special interest of mine. Apart from the first dinosaur books that my parents brought for me, one of my oldest memories relating to the subject was my first trip to the Natural History Museum in London. I can distinctly remember looking up in awe at the Diplodocus skeleton in the main hall, with my 4-year-old self marvelling at its sheer size and beauty. Therefore, given this animal's formative role in my continuing fascination with paleontology, I'm very glad to finally be examining it and its relatives in this video. During the Jurassic, crown group sauropods exploded in terms of diversity, with the clade Neosauropoda rising to prominence during the second half of the period. These animals shared up to 13 key anatomical traits that set them apart from other more basal sauropods, including the possession of a large opening in the skull known as the preantorbital fenestra, a general lack of denticles present on the teeth, a wedge-shaped astragalus, and metacarpals that were bound together, which enabled the hind feet to be held in an upright posture. Neosauropods can be divided into two major lineages, with these being the macronarians, which includes animals such as Camarasaurus, Brachiosaurus, and the Titanosaurs, as well as the sister group to Macronaria, and the subject of today's episode, the Diplodocids. This lineage contains some of the most famous sauropods, including Brontosaurus, Apatosaurus, and, of course, Diplodocus itself, although the group as a whole was far more diverse. While many forms possessed incredibly elongated necks and whip-like tails, being among the longest of all terrestrial vertebrates, others developed in the opposite direction, developing small body sizes and short necks, at least by sauropod standards. Their teeth were also replaced at a faster rate than any other group of vertebrates, with the genus Nigersaurus having new teeth erupting every 30 days. Originating during the Middle Jurassic, roughly 174 million years ago, there were three major diplodocoid families, with these being the long-lived Rabachisaurids, which persisted until about 90 million years ago in Gondwana, the comparatively short-necked and modestly sized Dicraeosaurids, and most famously, the long-necked Diplodocids. Given the diversity of these groups, I'll only be covering the Diplodocids in this video, as the Rabachisaurids and Dicraeosaurids deserve full episodes in their own right. Diplodocids thrived during the late Jurassic, with many forms being among the longest of all dinosaurs. First appearing around 170 million years ago, this family can be divided into two subfamilies, with these being the comparatively slender Diplodocines and the more robust Apatosaurines. We'll start by examining the latter, of which there are only two confirmed genera, both of which were very iconic animals that were endemic to the late Jurassic Morrison Formation of western North America. The type genus, Apatosaurus ajax, dwelt in what is now Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Wyoming during the late Kimmeridgian to early Tithonian stages of the Upper Jurassic, between 152 and 151 million years ago. It was a bulkier and more heavily built animal than its skinny cousin Diplodocus, with less elongated and more massively constructed cervical vertebrae, as well as stockier limb bones. Average size estimates for fully grown adults typically range between 21 and 23 metres, or 69 to 75 feet long, with weight estimates being in the region of 16 to 22 metric tons, which is roughly equivalent to 3 bull African elephants. However, more massive individuals have been described, such as specimen OMNH1670, which could potentially have reached 30 metres in length and 33 tons in mass, with a long whip-like tail that may have been utilised for a combination of balance, defence, and as a tactile organ for communication between members of a herd. Apatosaurus also possessed a square-tipped snout, equipped with peg-like teeth that indicate a generalised low-browsing diet that probably consisted of ferns, horsetails, and cycads. This goes against older reconstructions, which often depicted these animals as browsing from tall coniferous trees. In fact, some researchers indicated that Apatosaurus may have had a less flexible neck than is often assumed, although this idea has also received a good deal of pushback. In addition, given the robust nature of the animal's cervical vertebrae, Apatosaurus may have utilised its neck as a bludgeoning weapon during intraspecific combat. These dinosaurs grew rapidly as juveniles, and appear to have reached skeletal maturity at around 20 years old, with life expectancies of roughly 30 years or so. Dwelling in the hot, semi-arid Morrison Formation, Apatosaurus was the second most common sauropod in the region, with A. ajax being endemic to the brushy basin member, while the fossils of a second species, A. louisii, are rare and are only known from a single site within this member. The remains of this genus are regularly found alongside those of Allosaurus, Camarasaurus, Diplodocus and Stegosaurus. It was also a very close relative of the iconic and wonderfully named genus Brontosaurus excelsus, the thunder lizard. Despite achieving widespread fame during the early 20th century, becoming an archetypal large sauropod in the minds of many, from as early as 1903, it's been argued that this animal was a taxonomic synonym of Apatosaurus, and therefore not a valid genus. However, a 2015 study by Emmanuel Schopp et al. Found that there were enough differences between the two for Brontosaurus to be considered valid once again. Although this conclusion has not been universally accepted. It was comparable in size to Apatosaurus, but was a more temporally wide-ranging genus, inhabiting what is now Utah and Wyoming between 156 and 146 million years ago. 3 species have been assigned to Brontosaurus, with the oldest being B. yayapin, known from a single Lower Morrison site in Albany County, Wyoming, dating to circa 155 million years ago. This is followed by the younger B. parvus, from the Middle Kimmeridgian of Utah and Wyoming, as well as the youngest type species B. excelsus, from the Upper Morrison of Wyoming circa 152 million years ago. Despite skull material for this genus being currently unknown, it was probably very similar to that of Apatosaurus, which had thicker and more frequently replaced teeth than Diplodocus, indicating that Apatosaurines fed on tougher plant matter. Their necks may similarly have been utilised for intraspecific combat as well. Meanwhile, the sister lineage to the Apatosaurines were the more widespread and diverse Diplodocines, which were native to North America, Europe, Africa and South America between 155 and 136 million years ago, persisting into the very early Cretaceous. Producing up to 9 different genera, these were more lightly built animals than the Apatosaurines, often with proportionally longer necks and tails. The oldest and potentially the most basal of these may have been the genus Cartedocus from Wyoming circa 155 million years ago. Originally thought to be a specimen of Barosaurus, the holotype was reassessed in 2012 and was found to be its own unique genus. It was relatively small by diplodocid standards, measuring approximately 14 metres or 46 feet long. Its classification is also somewhat uncertain, although some recent studies have instead found it to be among the most basal dicreosaurids instead. Among the most basal confirmed diplodocines was Tornieria, from the famous late Jurassic Tendaguru beds of Tanzania. This was a relatively large animal and up to 25 metres or 82 feet long, and shared some traits in common with Barosaurus, including elongated neck vertebrae and comparatively long forelimbs, although it was different enough to be placed in its own genus. Given the somewhat more pointed shape of its jaws, Tornieria may have been a more selective feeder than the more derived square-mouthed diplodocines. Another relatively basal form was the enormous genus Supersaurus, which is among the longest of all dinosaurs. The type species, S. vivianae, was native to the brushy basin member of the Morrison Formation between 153 and 145 million years ago. It's known from 3 specimens, which ranged between 33 and at least 40 metres or 131 feet long, with mass estimates for the smaller WDC and BYU individuals being in the region of 35 to 44 metric tons. The largest specimen has come to be known as Jimbo and was truly enormous, potentially being over 40 metres long. However, Jimbo may not have been the largest Supersaurus specimen after all, as the massive cervical vertebrae BYU 9024, found in the same quarry as the holotype, belonged to an animal that may have reached an astonishing 50 metres or 160 feet long. This specimen was previously thought to belong to a freakishly large Barosaurus individual, although more recent research has found it to have been more likely to be Supersaurus instead. If these size estimates are correct, then this dinosaur may have been the longest non-colonial animal to have ever lived. A potential second species, Supersaurus laurinianensis, is known from the Tithonian of Portugal, although it's sometimes been classified as a separate genus Dinerosaurus. Represented by pretty scrappy material, this animal was significantly smaller than its close North American relative, probably being between 20 and 25 metres, or 66 to 82 feet long. However, the title of the smallest diplodocine goes to the late surviving genus Leincupal, from the early Cretaceous Baja Colorada formation of Argentina circa 136 million years ago. Measuring just 9 metres or 30 feet long, this modestly sized animal is the only unequivocal South American diplodocid, as well as the youngest member of the family, being the only genus to persist into the Cretaceous. Returning to the sauropod heavy Morrison formation, where diplodocines reached the apex of their diversity, we come to the relatively recently named genus Gallagher. Once thought to represent a species of Diplodocus, it was placed in its own genus by Schopp et al. In 2015. Gallagher was indeed quite similar to Diplodocus, but differed in possessing more massively constructed limbs and a particularly high and triangular neck close to the head. Ranging between 155 and 152 million years ago, there are currently 2 established species within the genus, G. hayi and G. pabsti. Interestingly, an individual of the latter, known as Dolly, was found to have suffered from a serious respiratory infection, with the bones of the neck being crooked and deformed in a way comparable to those of living animals with similar afflictions. This infection may have led to Dolly's death at between 15 and 20 years of age. A more well-known member of this group, and a close relative of Diplodocus itself, was Brontosaurus, yet again endemic to the Morrison Formation of late Jurassic Western North America, between 152 and 150 million years ago. This large animal measured between 25 and 27 metres, or between 82 and 89 feet long, and may have weighed between 12 and 20 metric tons. It was about the same length as Diplodocus, but was proportioned differently, with a longer and wider neck, as well as a shorter tail. Studies of its cervical vertebrae have showed that it fed at close to ground level, sweeping its neck in wide arcs to more effectively browse on low-growing vegetation. Despite the fact that the previously mentioned giant vertebra BYU 9024 is now generally thought to belong to Supersaurus, several other fossils stemming from unusually large Brontosaurus individuals are known, including 3 cervical vertebrae formerly known as BYU 3GR/20815. Estimates for the neck length of this specimen reach up to 15 metres or 49 feet, while the overall length of the animal may have been in the area of 40 metres or 130 feet. Finally, we come to the iconic Diplodocus, the namesake of this entire family. First described during the period of dinomania that followed the many paleontological discoveries made during the Bone Wars, Diplodocus is known from multiple specimens. By far the most famous example was uncovered in 1899, when a large and well-preserved individual was found at the outcropping of the Morrison Formation at Sheep Creek, Wyoming, by an expedition funded by steel magnate Andrew Carnegie. A second smaller specimen would be described from the same site in 1900, and from these the species D. carnegiei was erected the following year. A composite mount of these specimens would later be erected in the Carnegie Museum of Natural History in 1907, with a skull that has now been assigned to the genus Gallagher instead. This mount would come to be known as Dippy and became incredibly popular, with numerous casts of it sent to museums across Europe and the Americas as part of an attempt by Carnegie to promote both international unity and, perhaps more importantly, himself, something that the Scotsman was very good at doing. As a result of all this, in addition to the description of many other specimens across the 20th century, Diplodocus has become one of the best studied of all non-avian dinosaurs. Native to the Middle and Upper Morrison Formation, between 152 and 149 million years ago, this animal was among the most common sauropods in its environment. 2 species are known, with D. carnegiei being the smaller one, at between 24 and 26 metres, or 79 to 85 feet long. With a greatly elongated neck and whip-like tail, Diplodocus possessed a slender build, and weighed in the region of 12 to 15 metric tons. Although no skull is currently acknowledged for this genus, those of its close relatives suggest that the sauropod would have had relatively narrow jaws and a square-tipped snout which was adapted for a browsing herbivorous diet. While often depicted as a high browser, stripping leaves and twigs with its peg-like teeth, it's more likely that Diplodocus spent much of its time feeding on plant matter close to ground level. Comparisons with the contemporary sauropod Camarasaurus have showed that Diplodocus preferred softer vegetation, although juvenile Camarasaurus individuals present tooth wear patterns similar to adult Diplodocus. Meanwhile, young Diplodocus possess narrower snouts than the adults, indicating a more selective browsing diet. Histological studies have found that these youngsters would have reached skeletal maturity at between 24 and 34 years of age. Also, analysis of the scale structure and melanosomes attributed to juvenile diplodocids has found that these animals may have had more complex coat colours and patterns than had previously been thought. This is quite exciting, as it hints that sauropods are probably not simply limited to being battleship grey or brown, like many large multi-ton modern mammals. A second species of Diplodocus, D. hallorum, is also recognised. Formerly placed in its own unique genus Seismosaurus, hallorum could potentially reach up to 33.5 metres, or about 110 feet long, and may have weighed roughly 21 metric tons. It's recently been found that the D. hallorum holotype was around 60 years old at the time of its death, and had only recently reached skeletal maturity, which indicates that this species grew significantly more slowly and over a longer period than D. carnegii. Dwelling in the warm semi-arid Morrison Formation, Diplodocus almost certainly lived and travelled in herds based on footprint evidence, with their highly elongated tails potentially being utilised as tactile organs, to keep in contact with herd mates walking behind them. Older studies argued that the tail was used as a weapon to defend itself against predators like Allosaurus, being capable of cracking like a bullwhip. This is no longer thought to be the case, although I'm sure it certainly wouldn't have been pleasant to be on the receiving end of a tail strike wielded by a 14-ton animal. It lived in ecosystems dominated by a whole menagerie of large sauropods, all of which were able to live alongside each other by specialising into different niches. The Diplodocoids generally occupied low to medium height browsing roles, although were certainly capable of rearing up on their hind legs when necessary, while macronarians such as Camarasaurus fed on tougher vegetation, and the gigantic Brachiosaurus was a towering high browser. Despite their incredible success during the late Jurassic, Diplodocids declined massively at the end of the period, with only a single named genus, Leincupal, persisting into the early Cretaceous, although as yet undescribed fossils from South Africa and Morocco may also belong to lower Cretaceous members of the family. Their cousins, the Rabachisaurids and the Dicraeosaurids, would last longer, living alongside the diversifying titanosaurs, until all Diplodocoids finally vanish from the fossil record circa 90 million years ago. This would be the end of the so-called thunder lizards, icons of early 20th century dinomania. Thanks for watching, everyone. In the next episode we'll be looking at the Dicraeosaurids, the modestly sized yet striking looking sister group to the Diplodocids. See you again soon. Cheerio.